I'll get going. Thanks, Diane, and thanks everybody for uh, your attention. I've got 15 slides in 15 minutes, so that's my plan. As Diane mentioned, I do work at FICO, but I cannot improve your credit score, so please don't ask me. I'm going to take you through this brief presentation. I think there are people on the phone who have different levels of knowledge already about what's going on. So I'm going to have to make some assumptions about who knows what. If you're lost or you're lacking context, I try Diane, try me, try Susan or Chance, or Skylar, or a number of people on the phone I think could orient you. But I know that most people are somewhat up on the issue. So I'm going to dive in here. The top title is mine and the bottom title is Diane's. So it shows you who's creative and who has a sense of humor and who doesn't. Any picture in here, speaking of indulging my wildlife photography hobby, is from Point Reyes. So just along the way, trying to keep people's interest. There's not a lot of math here and there's no quiz at the end, but there are a few pictures sprinkled in here and there from the wildlife that we're lucky to have next door. So just wanted to mention that all the way through. These are all Point Reyes critters. I think people know this much, so briefly, just to get us oriented, we're going to refer to the plan. That is the mouthful, that is the draft environmental impact statement for the general management plan amendment. Basically, the park had to put out a plan for the management of the park going forward. It was RRI along with CBD and Western Watersheds that I think more or less forced their hand because they were dragging their feet, so to speak, to figure out what to do to manage the park going forward. There's 18,000 acres in Point Reyes National Seashore, and there's another 10,000 acres in GGNRA nearby that are in play here. What they did is they included 6 alternative plans, A through F, and we're going to talk about those a little bit, but just briefly, again, I think you guys know this, and most of you guys know this, and again, if you don't, reach out to one of us and we'll start you back at the beginning as needs be. When they published the plan, they were obliged by the NEPA Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, to take public comments on the plan. So what I'm really going to tell you about is the comments and what we did to analyze what were in the comments. Of course, the issues here are complex and there's a lot going on. There's a lot to say. People on the phone here have various expertise, Dr. Griffin, for instance, but many others in what the issues, the actual issues are in the park. What I'm going to focus on is just what the public said, because of course that's important. And my overall goal here, just this is an important orientation, I think, just for the next few minutes. What I'm really trying to do here is have you guys understand what the comments were, what was said, what we did to evaluate them and count them, and determine the public sentiment that came out of the comments. Because right away you will see people saying, oh, it was skewed, it was biased, it was run by RRI, people say, so of course what would you expect, there's an environmental group, and so on and so forth. And most of that is untrue. Virtually all of that is untrue. If you care about the park and you're involved in some way and you're going to advocate in some way, it's important, I think, that you know how we addressed the comments, because if you're confident and comfortable with what was done and how we added things up, then you can use that. If you write a letter or just if you have a discussion with somebody if you're on a message board, and we all know how fun those are, don't let anybody tell you that this analysis of the public sentiment was skewed or biased or inaccurate. Don't let them tell you that. We're very confident in what we did. And if you need this presentation, we'll offer it. We'll offer the PowerPoint going forward. But if you need any backup, reach out, please, to myself, or you'll know the people on the phone as well. But I can be point of contact for this. RRI published the study, and it's on their website. And so there's Susan and Chance and people there, Deborah, you can reach out to. But I want you to know that we counted things up and that what we're saying is accurate. And I'll show you over the next few minutes, but that's the point of this. So to get back to it, there was a website where you could post your comment, and 7,627 people did so. There were more comments submitted to the park, but some of them were rejected out of some sort of trumped up. And I think Diana Oppenheim knows about this. There's some comments were not accepted, and I think the numbers would be even more skewed than what they are. But what the park recognizes is 7,600 some odd comments. So we read those comments. Actually, let me go stepwise here. I think I need to mention this as well. Here are the 6 plans or alternatives that are in the plan published by the park. Some of you know the stuff well, so I'll be brief on here. But I think if you don't know this, you need to know it at least a little bit to understand the rest of what's coming. A through F. A means don't do anything different. It's just the status quo. B is what's called the preferred alternative. So even though the park is saying, here are 6 options, they have also said, this is the option that we prefer. And by the way, that's, within a month or 2 or 3, they're very likely going to come out and say, okay, plan B it is. So this is what we can expect to deal with. Alternative B has a lot of things that are concerning many of us: expanding the footprint of the ranches, introducing different animals, different livestock out there, introducing row crops, controlling the elk herd, meaning killing, not the whole herd and this plan, but lethal control of the population. The details are there in the published plan to be seen, but this is sort of a high-level overview. There's a lot to worry about in Plan B. C is just like B, but removing the entire Drake's Beach herd. So that would be killing the 100 and some odd elk that are down there at Drake's Beach. D, E are curtail ranching, but don't eliminate it. So there's 2 different options where there's some of the commercial activities are phased back, but not fully. So it's, as it says here, D is phasing out 7,500 acres of grazing and then leaving the rest. And then E is taking out the dairies, but leaving the ranches. F is phasing out dairies and ranches entirely over 5 years. Here's what we did. So the park published all the comments. They are public. So if you made and if you put your name there, this is now available to the public. We took all the 7,627 comments and we split them up into blocks of 500 each. By the way, this is somewhat mechanical, and I'll be brief here because it's not ultimately very important, but again, I think that a foundation in what we did will make people comfortable to talk about the results. So very briefly on this part. Broke up the comments into 500 blocks of 500. Went through one of those blocks to figure out categories for our subsequent analysis. So basically, I read 500 of them and tried to figure out what were the prevalent types of comments that were in there. And we'll go over the categories next, but taking a random 500 as a sample, what did it sort of look like? What were categories that made sense in our subsequent counting? We didn't want too few, we didn't want too many. We wanted to be able to roll up those categories later into people generally for ranching and people generally against ranching. I'll go into some of the details of that. Once we had the categories, we took all the blocks and split it up amongst the volunteers and the RRI folks that made themselves available to do the counting. A lot of those people are on the phone, and I've got the names of everybody who helped in a subsequent slide. So there's a lot of people on the phone here who did a tremendous amount of work to get this done. It really matters that we read every comment, I believe, and I'll talk more about that later. So a lot of credit to people who did hours and hours and hours of drudgery. And we have very useful information because of the work that was done. So as I said, we split it up into 500 blocks of 500. We figured out some categories, we split it up, and we categorized everything. When we did that, by the way, the categories were explained, and we met with each other, and we had samples going back and forth. I want to make sure that you guys know we were very, very careful in the way we did it. As we did the categorizations, if there were gray areas, we would call each other or email each other and say, does this look like a gray one to you or a pink one? Does this look like a blue one or a yellow one? We cross-checked each other quite a bit. And that's very important when you consider that we may get charged with bias, or we may get charged with having done this sort of fast and loose. We were very careful and methodical and spent the right amount of time, I think, doing this. Once we were done with the categories or the categorizations, I collected them all. We had counted them. We just sort of collated the results, which I will present to you in a coming subsequent slide. After we did that initial categorization, we sort of realized it was a little late, and I put people back through some more work, but we went through one more time. And the reason we went through a second time was to count up people who did any explicit endorsement of any of those alternatives that I just showed you. So in other words, if someone said, I'm for A, or I'm for F, or I'm for B, or whatever, we wanted to have a distinct count of people who took that stance. And so we have a different set of results that represents that information. Of anybody who explicitly endorsed any particular alternative, what are the numbers? We have that as well to share with you. At the end, we added that all up and wrote a summary. Included in the summary is a more detailed version of what I just told you. What are the steps? What did we do? Because if anybody wants to come in and say it's skewed, it's biased, it was not done properly, and so on, we can say, and I've said it already many times, just read this paper. If you doubt what we did, just read this paper. And if you have any issue with it, then come back to us. And no one's come back yet, if you know what I'm saying. So in other words, we can back up what we're claiming. Here are the categories. There's a sense in which it doesn't matter too much in the details, but maybe it's important, at least depending on how much you get into it and how you use the information that you do understand, how we categorize. So very briefly, a lot of people just said, don't you dare kill the elk, and how, what are you doing? And please don't shoot the elk, and it's wrong to shoot the elk, and so on. So if people said basically only that, then that was a category. Some people said ranching doesn't belong in a national park. Private industry doesn't belong in a national park. National parks are for wildlife, not for commerce and profit. Where people said that, even if they also said, and by the way, don't kill the elk, we made that its own category as well. So that's category 2. A lot of people had a lot to say on many different points against the alternatives presented. There were some sort of form letters. CBD had passed out some talking points. That's Center for Biological Diversity. And a lot of people took those to heart and used those in their own comments. And a lot of people, and names we would recognize and other people as well, took time to lay out a systematic or methodical criticism of what was there. More than you would expect, the public really spent a lot of time and energy on this. So one category just became multifaceted or multi-fronted criticisms of the plan. That was yellow. Where anybody just said, I'm for F, because a lot of people said F, remember, is the category that says, or the alternative that says remove ranching from the park. So a lot of people just said F is the only thing, or you better do F, or I vote for F. That became its own category. There's a category, inevitably, unavoidably, there's a category for kind of unclear or ambiguous. Or, for instance, a lot of people just said, as long as I can ride my bike in there, I don't care what you do. So there was a pink category that meant just sort of non-committal one way or the other. And then there's a category in favor of ranching. And that includes people who defended ranching at some length. And that also includes people who just said, I'm for A, B, or C. Remember, A is the status quo, so it includes ranching now. B is sort of an expansion of ranching and diversification and other things. And C is a version of B, but with removing an elk herd. So if anybody said A, B, or C, or just said, you know, the ranching is historic and belongs there and so on, we counted them in their own category. Okay, so results. These are second nature to me, so I'll try not to go by too fast. But again, all the detailed data is available, and then there's another summary coming over the next couple of slides. People who more or less said, let's not kill any elk, that was about 20% of the comments. People who said ranching doesn't belong there because it's, you know, private industry doesn't belong there, or it's time for them to go, that kind of straightforward sentiment, that was 27.5%. People who wrote longish, not necessarily lengthy, but multi-pointed criticisms of the preferred plan was about another 20%. People who just said it should be alternative F, meaning getting ranching out, is 23%. The other and ambiguous category was 6.3%. Of that category, by the way, a little more than half of those were bicycle coalition people. I found this sort of amusing. It's almost as if they said, shoot whatever you want and do whatever you want with the land, as long as I can ride my bike there. I'm fine. I don't think those good people of the Marin Bike Coalition actually feel that way, but it was odd to me that there were so many copy-pasted comments that said, all we care about is expanded bike access. I understand it's a focus group. That makes sense. But I just want to let you know that of that 6.3%, a lot of what's there, half of that approximately, are bicycle people. People who said one way or the other, I'm in favor of ranching, or I'm in favor of plan A, B, or C, or keep the ranches there, 179 in total, 2.3% of all the comments. What we did on the next slide is we took the first 4 categories and just rolled them up. So, I mean, it's the same math, right? There's no calculus involved here. There's nothing more than arithmetic involved here, but we took those four because all those four, in some sense, are saying we're not in favor of Plan B, either because it kills elk or it expands ranching or this or that. We took those four and added them up. And so that's where the 91.4% comes from. I think a lot of you have seen that already. It's a powerful number, right? It's more than 9 out of 10 that in some way, shape, or form are unhappy about ranching or the plan, including culling elk in the park. There's that same 6.3%, which is Bicycle Coalition and others. And then there's the 2.3% that said something in favor of ranching one way or the other. I had said that we took a second pass to go through anybody who explicitly mentioned any particular plan. And so that's what this is. Anybody who said A, B, or C, there's 91 people. Anybody who said D or E, it's an odd one, D or E, because it's curtailing ranching, so it's keeping it, but kind of toning it down, less than 1%. And then people who endorsed F. So keep in mind, this is of people who mention an explicit or explicitly mention a plan. That's why the numbers don't add up to the 7,600. Most people just said something. They didn't say, I like this plan or that plan. But of all the people who mention a plan, it's 94% who endorsed F. Mindful of time here, so I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit. I've got, I think, 3 or 4 slides that try to pull out what I think are important points based on my experience of reading all these comments and running this thing, and I think follow from the results that we found. Editorials and a lot of letters and a lot of people are coming out and basically trying to strawman or diminish the importance of the public comments, saying things like, oh, this is just an anti-Trump wave, or this is just animal rights activists saying don't you shoot the elk. A lot of people are just trying to box in what got said. And this slide is trying to show you that you shouldn't let them do that. It's not correct. If you read the comments, or even if you just sample the comments, you'll see that there are very diverse issues that are important to a lot of people up and down all the comments. It's not a single issue. Although it's overwhelmingly against ranching, it's overwhelmingly against ranching for many different reasons. Okay, so I'd like you to keep that in mind. I recommend you keep that in mind if you go out into the world and argue and write and advocate for the park. A lot of people say, well, it's skewed because RRI ran it. And I mean, people go so far as to say that it's a poll of the RRI membership. It's not. The national park had to solicit comments from the public. Anybody was welcome to comment. It's nothing but sour grapes and kind of grasping at straws, in my view, to say, well, you know, all these environmental groups mobilized their membership. Yeah, sure. That's how people organize themselves to come out for things that are important to them. But it's not a survey and it's not a poll. It's not as though we stood out in front of the RRI offices and ask people what they think, which would be a terrible bias. There's no bias involved. It's the public volunteered their own comments. Anybody could, anybody knew about it. People in favor of ranching, in favor of commerce, in favor of dairies in the park had just as much opportunity and knowledge and the same access to the same website to make any comments. Yeah, I think I covered this a little bit already. I mean, the IJ is saying, oh, this is an orchestrated national campaign to skew the results. Well, national is a weird thing to say, as if that counts against what we found. It's a national park, after all. So a national sentiment seems to be what's called for. this idea that, well, local people feel differently. I mean, first of all, that's not true. That really doesn't appear to be true from the comments. Most people who came out in favor of ranches may be local because they're ranchers themselves, or they're malt members, or they're connected to ranch families, or friends with them, and so on. That's all fine. But if you say that we don't care what the results were because comments came in from far afield, then you probably don't understand what the national park system is in the first place. And I realize I sound a little pedantic or a little bit righteous on that one, but you keep hearing it. Oh, who cares what outsiders, urban outsiders is a good one, say about this. Yeah, it's a national park, so the public has the same right. We can all talk about and comment on national parks in the Everglades to Alaska to Point Reyes. That's what the national park system is. Okay, this is the most important slide, I believe, in the whole deck. We are extremely confident in what we're saying. We read every comment. Okay, so if there were a lot more comments, we may have been tempted to take the text and feed it into an algorithm, feed it into a computer program that does what's called a sentiment analysis. In other words, looks for keywords to try to figure out how people feel about this. So for instance, large companies take their call center transcripts and feed it through a sentiment analysis algorithm to try to figure out if their customers are happy or unhappy or what's going on with their customer base. We did not do that. We read every comment, right? So even today, and I know a little bit about analytics and data analytics and sentiment analysis, even today, the gold standard for accuracy in sentiment analysis is for a native speaker to read the text and look at it themselves. And that's what we did to all the 7,624 comments. But sorry, I said 7,624 because that's how many the park thinks there are. There's actually 7,627 because there's 3 occurrences where the same number appears twice or they counted wrong, right? So that's the level of detail that we went into. So, don't let anybody tell you that we glanced at it and put our finger in the air and, came up with a biased view of it. So that's very important. You should not worry about using these results when you go on and talk about the park. And if you're not convinced by now, let me know, and I will offline further. One, just wrapping up, thanks for your patience. I think I went over time. I'm sorry, Diane. Everything that we did, including coding all the comments, is available on the RRI website that you see here. So at the end of the day, if somebody says, I still don't believe you, or this is still a environmental, tree hugger hippie hoax against what the public actually said, you just say, look here, you count them yourself. If you count them up any different, let us know and we'll talk to you about it. But we counted them up as fairly as we could, and this is what we came up with. So all the raw data that we produced is being made public. That is full transparency. That makes us, I think, very much inoculated against charges of bias. Here is the list of people who worked on it. Many of them are on the phone. Deborah Moskowitz read so many comments. I mean, it was a heroic effort. Deb, thank you for that. This is their picture, by the way, these birds. This is all the volunteers. It's Susan Ives that's facing the opposite direction. We love her, but she's different. So communications, if you need to reach out to anybody, Chance did a lot, Daniel did a lot. Everybody, Mark Walsh is here, I know, on the phone. So if there's questions later in the Q&A, Mark, please help me out as you will. There's no one did it anonymously. It's a tremendous amount of work, and we owe thank you to these people for giving us this very useful analysis and information. And that's it from me.